but old ones, ideas that many thought had been consigned to history.
Gabriel Gatehouse there. Well, joining us now from Hungary, Frank Furedi. And here in the studio, Julia Ebner. Very nice to have you both. And you heard how Gabriel ended that piece. These are not new ideas, but old ones. When you see this movement, Julia, do you think this is something new or something that you've seen before?
Well, it's definitely a renaissance of some form, but I think there is a clear new dimension to it, and that is that increasingly we see younger generations, we see educated people across all classes, across all social backgrounds, joining far-right movements, both populist movements and the more militant ones. And I think what we're seeing is effectively a full-blown far-right renaissance across Europe or across the world.
And when you say far-right and you talk about populism, is that something that scares you?
Definitely, because I do see a clear connection between the populist far-right spreading hateful ideologies and the more militant far-right. And increasingly attacks are happening all across Europe. Far-right terrorism is becoming a bigger threat at the moment than jihadist terrorism. And we've seen attacks, across the entire continent.
Frank Furedi, do you feel that's overblown?
I think so. There's a kind of hysterical reaction where we continue to talk about it's just like Hitler, it's just like the 1930s, and we're confusing a small number of young right-wing activists with a broader populist impulse that's enveloping Europe, which has got some positive aspects and some negative aspects. And I think there's a danger that we simply pathologize everything that is unusual and everything that questions establishment. And the people in the package that I just saw now are in many respects the mirror image of the identity.
Frank, forgive us, we're going to try and sort out your line. We've got terrible sound problems there, but let me put some of what we've gleaned from that to Julia. Identitarians, or however you want to call them, complain that they've been forced to accept an erosion of their culture, laws, national boundaries, and that when you call this extreme or sort of scary populism or far-right, you prove their point. You take things that this, liberal society has decreed taboo, and you don't let anyone express their fears about it.
Well, the problem about this taboo becoming of expressing anti-Muslim resentments, for example, becoming more of a legitimate dinner table discussion is that effectively it has fed into both militant far-right movements, but also into exactly the narratives that Islamist extremists are spreading. One that the West is at war with Islam. And we're seeing this, this cultural war that both Anders Breivik, the Norwegian terrorist who killed 70 people on that island in 2011, and the narratives of al-Baghdadi, we see these narratives turning into a self-fulfilling prophecy, into a global civil war between Muslims and non-Muslims.
But, I'm going to try and go to Frank. Can we go to Frank? I don't know if you can still hear us. The concern is, Frank, that you are missing what is essentially the return of fascism, that this is neo-Nazism by any other name.
Yeah, I think that's a loss of historical imagination. When you think about the 1930s and what fascists represented, and you compare that to kids who are spread all over Europe and who are, in an unconfused way, trying to make sense of that uncertainty, I think there's a real danger of crying wolf. And we're crying wolf a lot of them, not realizing that there is also...
I'm so sorry, we're just not getting a good enough line. I'm going to give you one of Frank Furedi's lines, though. He talked about the promiscuous diagnosis of populism, which, in other words, allows the elite who have been, if you like, guilty of corrupt politicians or undemocratic institutions or sort of badly organised bodies that have had too much power to sort of displace their anxiety by using this sort of, accusation of populism just to make themselves feel better. And there is something in that, isn't there?
Yeah, well, definitely. I think just finger-pointing and scapegoating everyone who voted for the far right in Austria or voted for Brexit is the wrong approach to it. And I do agree that much of this is rooted in a deep disappointment of the establishment not addressing the problems that major, I would say, marginalized majorities are facing.
So is it too late? I mean, how do you see these movements now? And Gabriel joined up the dots for us. He showed us the movements in Vienna, in Paris. But reminding us, it's very small numbers at the moment. Is this a niche interest group, or is this the beginning of a revolution, do you think?
I mean, that is the problem we're seeing from online, offline hate crimes, support for the alt-right in the US, support for identity movements in Austria and France, support for pretty much groups on all different levels. We're seeing a sharp rise. And I think this is becoming more and more mainstream, so it's something we need to address. And in fact, I would say that it's like having two sides of the same coin. You have the Islamist extremists on one side and the far right on the other side. And if we don't address both of them, they will both get richer and richer, because for every far right extremist that we get also another potential jihadist. And then it's just a matter of time until we toss the coin.
Do you think there'll be
And we
these
see
groups
either
in
a far
power
right-
by the end of the decade? What do you think?
Well, by the end of the day, I mean, I do hope that this cultural war that both extremists and both identity movements on both sides are speaking about is not turning into reality. But right now, I am seriously concerned by the developments both on this side of the Atlantic, but also on what is happening with Trump now.
Julia Ebner.